What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the Mojotone high voltage discrete series effects loop. Let's get into it. Okay guys, so I just finished up installing the Mojotone high voltage effects loop into my Mojotone British 50 kit, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. The installation is pretty easy. You technically only need 4 wires. So what I did was just twisted the wires together. Ideally, you'd want to use shielded wire, but I didn't have any, so in this case, I just used what I had. This did take me a little bit longer than I anticipated, but this was my first amp build, so please excuse some of the lead dress and the first time I had ever wired in an effects loop. The only part that I had spent quite a bit of time on was researching the B+ power, where I needed to pull it from. You can see right here after the phase inverter, the yellow wire, that is where I'm pulling the power to the effects loop from. The red wire, before it goes into this 10K resistor, comes right off of the second to last filter cap. So once I realized where I needed to pull my power from, the installation was pretty easy. On the right side of this board, if you're looking at the bottom, there's a B+ spot and a ground spot for the power and the ground. And then there's just the in and the out section of the effects loop. It also has ground spots for shielded coax cable, which is nice. I think I'm going to end up upgrading the wiring on this to that, but this seems to work fine for now. If you're installing this effects loop, the in and the out wiring is pretty easy. So the in is going to come straight from the board over to the treble wiper lug. Normally on this kit, there's a jumper wire going from the treble wiper over to the master in. So you'll just want to remove that. And then your out just goes right from the effects loop over to the master in. And then that's it. Your effects loop is wired in. On the other side of the effects loop circuit board, there is a small potentiometer for the send level, and it gives you the option to hook up a remote pot. You can see right here I didn't plan on using this at first, and then I started to realize that it was kind of an inconvenience to have to pull the board back out because of the way I'd mounted it to adjust the level to try and match up when the effects loop is bypassed. When I first hooked up the remote pot, I had tried to use a 100K volume pot, basically from a pedal, and then I quickly realized that that wasn't going to work. So I'd pulled that back out, and I had a 1 meg master volume pot that I put in place of my secondary speaker jack. So the only holes that I had to drill into the chassis were for the actual effects loop board, which comes with a template that's very easy to just tape up and mark where your holes are going to go. For the installation, I had just used a stepped drill bit that I picked up at Lowe's for I think around $50. Pretty straightforward to use and then drill out the holes. There are a couple things that I personally would have done differently during this installation, and I'm going to flip the amp over and show you guys what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. Clearly, you can see the damage right there above the bypass switch. Before I had installed this, I had glued the front and the back panel down, but clearly I did not do well enough of a job because as I was drilling this, it ended up crinkling the back plate. I guess it's not a super big deal since this isn't a real vintage Marshall, but definitely not cool. I'm going to go ahead and put the chassis back into the head shell, and we'll fire up the amp through my Bogner 412 cabinet, mic'd up with an SM57 on a Celestion UK greenback. I'm going to stick a Electro Harmonics Memory Boy delay in the loop so that way you guys can kind of hear how the loop sounds. And I'll also engage and disengage the bypass on the loop so you can hear the tonal difference that this loop makes in the amp. I can't hear a massive difference, but I do know that some effects loops really take their toll on amps. I own the Paul Reed Smith MT15, and I cannot stand that effects loop. I think it sounds terrible, and it kind of sucks the life out of the amp. Even though the amp sounds great itself, that effects loop is not so hot. Okay, guys, I've got the amp back into the head shell, and I went ahead and made the labels for the effects loop and the loop level knob, so that way when you look at the back, you kind of know what's going on. Fortunately, the back panel of the amp covered up some of the damages that were done when I had drilled the holes into the chassis for the effects loop. So that's kind of a win, but the stickers aren't perfect, but I definitely think that they'll work for this one. Okay guys, so I have the amp hooked up. I'm playing my 2011 made in Japan Charvel San Dimas with a JB in the bridge and a Jazz in the neck. Here's the amp with the loop bypass. And here it is with it engaged with no effects on. Now it's disengaged. There it is engaged again. So I can't hear a big difference in the loop with it engaged and when it's bypassed. I do have the levels matched as close as I can hear it. Let's go ahead and kick on the Electro Harmonics Memory Boy and hear what that sounds like. I think the loop sounds pretty good. I think that's just gonna do it for this video. If you guys have any favorite effects loops, leave it in the comments. I want to hear from you guys. I know Head First makes a good one. Everybody, I'm sure, has heard of the Metro Zero Loss, which is probably the best effects loop out there. I think price-wise, this loop and the Metro are about the same. I'm not exactly sure on that. I think I paid $70 for this loop. So not really a bad deal, and the installation wasn't a total pain. So I'd probably recommend this loop, especially for a beginner. You know, this is my first amp build, so it was not super difficult. There is a couple different sets of instructions online. I do want to give a shout out to Jason from Head First. Without his good videos, all the content that he puts out, I would have had a much harder of a time installing this effects loop. So thank you, Jason, for all the content that you put out. Until the next video, see you guys.